For a further breakdown of this situation, we have with us Professor Se-ryun from Kyung University. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Good to be here.
So I don't think it's too much of a cliche to say that this is one of the biggest tests of the Trump presidency, and I think the American public know it as well. Early voting we've seen so far is almost twice that of the 2014 elections as well. I mean, how do you see these elections?
Well, this is a very interesting election. Traditionally, you would have said that midterm election is traditionally a referendum for whoever is in the White House. It's a bad news for the ruling party because the voters seek to kind of counterbalance what has been going on. And it's an early indication of what might happen in the subsequent presidential election. But this time around, a lot of dynamics have been changed. For example, the voter turnout is a very high in this election. And that, I think, is owed to the fact that Donald Trump has been a very polarizing figure. He has been divisive in terms of how he rallies his own faction, but at the same time exclude the other parties and the other sentiments. But in terms of dynamics of having a fight, it is a good news because in terms of having a good fight, you need to have a clear side that's separated by the two with some distance. So in that sense, I think that this time around it's going to be more fierce in terms of how each liberal and conservative the factions will push for their agenda. I think that in terms of predictions, I'll go with the popular predictions, but I think that it's going to be a very fierce fight.
You just mentioned their predictions. I mean, latest polls suggest that the Democrats are favourite to win their House back, while the Republicans are to keep hold of the Senate. That's what the poll is saying. But as we've seen in recent years, polls can be very wrong. I mean, do you have some sort of prediction for these? I mean, when you look at these polls, what do you see?
That is true. That's what happened in 2016. It went against the popular prediction of who's going to win. But there was a electoral college dynamics that has seeped in to influence that. But at this point, if you just look at the popularity figures, President Trump is about 41%. And they're thinking that all the House of Representatives seat is up for re-election, all 435 of them. Probably you can see that 41% might hold. That means that's going to be working in favor of the Democrats. But on the Senate side, the dynamics are different. Only 35 of the seat is up for re-election, and out of 35, only 9 seats are on the Republican incumbents. And with it 9, only 2 of them are kind of the toss-up states. And on the Democrat side, there are 1 seat expected to kind of turn red at this point to the Republicans, and 3 more are toss-up states. So if you look at it that way, dynamics are clearly in favor of the Republicans on the Senate side. So in that sense, it works out to be Senate to Republicans and House of Representatives to the Democrats.
Yes, as you said, it is going to be very interesting to see what happens. And as you said, this kind of divisive figure at least gets people out to come voting and to care about these kind of elections again, because sometimes midterms can be quite quiet. But of course, let's look at further away now as well, because these results of the elections, of course, normally it's a domestic issue, but I think this time as well, there are many other countries looking at these elections as well with a keen interest. Let's start with South Korea here first. What do you think Seoul and the South Korean government, the South Korean people, will be looking at from these elections?
Well, I think we're a little bit conflicted. If you look at the Korean economic side of it, we're an export-driven country, so we have been doing well in the era of a globalization and the rule-based system of free trade. Donald Trump is not about those actions. He is going against the institutions the international institutions that the United States have established. So in that sense, Korea, I think that the Chinese sentiment would be pretty similar, that it would be better, for economic sense, to have a better check from the Congress. So that means flipping the Congress in both, or at least one of them, might help. But on the other hand, our another priority is to have a good result in the North Korean matters. That goes to whether Donald Trump has a better leeway to conduct his foreign policy matters. In that sense, from that viewpoint, probably South Korea does not want Donald Trump to lose big.
Mm. You talked about the North Korea issue there. Let's move on to that. So Trump, he put off the possible second summit with Kim Jong-un until after the midterm elections. That's what he said, because he said he'd be too busy before then.
Right.
So how do you think this, the results of this election will affect how he now goes ahead with North Korea?
In one sense, it would not matter that much. Traditionally, American presidents have more foreign policy power than others in domestic issues. So whatever happens in the Congress might not affect him too much. And besides, his style has been that he would not really care what other people would say. Mm. But at the same time, though, if he is too bogged down by the congressional investigations into many different matters, probably that would keep him too busy in domestic issues to look for his way out in the foreign policy matters. But another dynamics is that there's not much urgency at this point. I mean, we once speculated that he would push for the North Korean diplomacy matters because of the midterm elections, but that is not an issue at this point. So in that sense, he would more focus on how he can win on this, so focusing on the negotiation dynamics of it, under which probably waiting game might be one of the cards that he would have. And probably what would drive him further after the midterm election is the re-election in 2 years. So if you look at that time frame, there's no real urgency there. So he'll try to keep his promise. He'll try to have a legacy of the peacemaker in the world. So he would push forward, but in terms of how much he would push forward and how fast he would do, probably he's at a good position to kind of wait it out if he wants to.
He could wait it out, but there are some people, some critics who have concerns that say if Trump does lose and gets bogged down by domestic issues, he might try to force a win on international issues, specifically with North Korea as well, and that he might push for become even more hardball with North Korea, risking further ire with and further tension with North Korea. Do you think these concerns have merit?
I think it has a merit. I think that Europe is thinking the same thing. They want to have a better rule-based system kind of restored. So probably European countries want Donald Trump to lose, but not too big, because if he loses too big, like I said, American presidents have more leeway in foreign policy matters. So in order to win, if he cannot win in the domestic matters, he might kind of give more attention and more thrust to the foreign policy matters. So in that sense, it'll flip the argument the other way. You're absolutely right. So in that sense, I think the result is important, but how much of a result it comes out would be kind of a subtle but important factor.
Mm. Of course, not just North Korea and South Korea, but also China will be keeping a close watch on these election results as well. What's interesting, though, is actually just the other day, just Thursday, Trump and Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, held a phone call together where they discussed trade and North Korea as well. What does it say about the fact that these two leaders found time to have this phone conversation just a few days before these crucial elections?
Well, the suspicion is that Donald Trump was using China, by vilifying China, he's kind of rallying his own factions. It's China's fault, so to speak. So after the midterm election, whatever the result is, China might expect that trade war might lose its kind of motivation from Donald Trump's part. And if the Congress is flipped one way at both sides, probably they'll want more of a check and balances on the foreign policy and the economic policy. So in that sense, there would be kind of a pivoting towards more of a free trade sentiment on it. So I think that Donald Trump would not mind too much of that kind of movement in that small scales. So in that sense, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping probably is not really at the loggerhead after the midterm election.
As I said, they talked about North Korea as well. I mean, what do you think the message is from this phone call? What would they have talked about North Korea right now? Because things have not moved much in the last couple of months.
Right. And Donald Trump has always urged China to play the bigger role. At this point, Donald Trump is well advised to stick to his rhetoric of looking for a complete, kind of verifiable result. But at the same time, he'll play his politics by pushing China more, but at the same time looking for a role from the South Korea to play the mediator role as it had, so that the negotiation dynamics will continue. So in that sense, I think that the Xi Jinping might be hearing kind of two different messages from Donald Trump. One is, we want your cooperation, but at the same time, he's scolding China's tactics.
Now let's, finally, before we go, so immediately after the midterm elections, it seems like Pompeo, his Secretary of State, will be meeting with North Korean counterparts in the US, and that's
Right.
what he's been saying. What's interesting, though, is as well, because when Trump put off the summit with Kim Jong-un after the midterm elections, we thought there might be some working level talks or senior level talks happening between the US and North Korea during that time as well. But in fact, North Korea seems to have stalled and kept delaying it until after these midterm elections. Do you think the North Koreans are also looking at these midterm elections and trying to see what way the results go and see how you can use that to their advantage as well?
Absolutely. The North Korea, for a time being, has been looking at the situation as an intense game of chess that played out on a negotiation table. That's why they pulled in China, that's why they're meeting Russia, that's why they're looking at intensely what the domestic situation is for Donald Trump, so that they can gauge the strength and weaknesses of Donald Trump. So midterm election gives, one way or the other, how much he is being powered by his parties in the Congress, or he's going to be bogged down to an extent by what's happening in the Congress. So I think what happens in the midterm election is of great interest domestically to Donald Trump, but to North Korea, to see what kind of weakness they can exploit, or what kind of tactics they could have in furthering the negotiation with the United States.
I mean, but what could some of those tactics be? I mean, depending on the situation, does it really affect how North Koreans plan to negotiate?
For example, midterm election, there was a period of time when North Korea potentially had a message to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, by having a good result, we can help you in winning the midterm election or influence the midterm election. That's gone, but we have a re-election coming up next time, and also his legacies and whatever happens at the domestic scene, North Korea could look for an opportunity to help out or scratch Donald Trump's back. It seems like it's an apt metaphor for those people who are engaged in kind of mob tactics so far, and their style has been pretty similar in terms of how to provoke certain tensions and easing the tensions. So in that sense, that kind of, if you look at it, a dance probably would resume as soon as they try figure out what kind of tunes they are dancing to.
Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you for coming in, Professor Song, and it's always great to get your insights.
Thank you.